Regina Caeli, let
Praise be Jesus and Mary. With this program of a month with Mary, we are focusing on consecration to the Immaculate. And we have up to this point looked at the example and the method of St. Louis de Montfort. Yet there's another prominent method, an example to follow, that of St. Maximilian Kolbe, who knew well the method of St. Louis de Montfort and expanded on it actually, and came up with his own formula. Now, as we are following the layout of Father Gately, here we begin with he's going to look at, of course, the very theme of the life of St. Maximilian. Who are you, O Immaculate Conception? But first he starts out with looking a little bit at, who are you, St. Maximilian? And there are several titles by which he is known. And we're familiar with them, most of them. I think most of us are familiar with most of them. Martyr of Charity, the Saint of Auschwitz, founder of the Militia of Imakulata, Apostle of Mary, and patron saint of the 20th century. By the way, he's also patron saint of those addicted to drugs. But we begin by looking at who he was before he became all of those things, going back even to his boyhood in Poland, where he was Raymond. His baptismal name was Raymond. And he was actually a rather mischievous boy growing up, so much so that his mother would come to the point, she must have found him doing something that he wasn't supposed to do, I don't know, getting mischievous, and she just gasped and said, Raymond, what will become of you? And that stung him to the heart, that really got to him, and he began to pray over that. And as a family, well, it's probably very common in Poland, they had a very tender devotion to Our Lady of Częstochowa. And he went to the church and prayed before her image. And she appeared to him. And she offered him 2 crowns. The white one of purity, and the red one of martyrdom. And much like Saint Therese of Lisieux, whom he had a great devotion to, he said, I'll take them both. He's willing to take all. In fact, it would become his wish to be totally consumed with the Immaculate. For her, actually, consumed. Completely give everything to her. And that's the theme here now as we go along with his method for the consecration. This is his whole theme. This is what we're going to be looking at and what we're going to be reflecting on as we go through this. The theme of total self-immolation, total sacrifice. And so now, as we go on, we see now he would get the white crown of purity, of course, would come to him when he entered religion and professed his vows, the evangelical counsels, poverty, chastity, which then leads to purity, and obedience. But here, Father Gately points out to us here, there's also another kind of purity. That's the purity of intention. So that our intention is always to fulfill the will of God, for Him, not for ourselves, not for our own gratification, what pleases us, but what is the will of God? How can I give myself back to God, basically? What does God will of me? Or as it will be, yes, ultimately everything to God, the divine purposes for God. And so the next point now, he will seek, he felt very strongly a desire to give himself to a specific mission or goal. Now, he was taught very well by his father in Poland. Be very strong, tough. All right. In fact, one of the ways he helped them to grow in that toughness was they had a little method they used. Every day they would walk out. Actually, they'd do running in their bare feet on the snow. All right. He wanted them, and he always had the idea of being a warrior, a knight, and that was that St. Maximilian would take with him into the religious life. And bearing in mind, I'll repeat it again, they had a very tender devotion to Our Lady, so it would become to be the knight of the Immaculate. That's what he would seek, to be her knight, her warrior. And he founded in Rome, as a seminarian, the Militia of Imakulata. Militia Imakulata in the Latin, the Militia of the Immaculate, with 6 confreres. In 1917, just 3 days after the miracle of the sun at Fatima. This would be their avenue of conquering all souls for the Immaculate, for the kingdom of God through the Immaculate, my consecration to her. And in fact, when I entered religion, when I first entered in Italy, I had to go first to that very friary where he founded the Militia. There I stayed for a few days before going on down to what is our mother house in Frigento. And I was with our own Father Peter, who was a friar, who was a member of that community at that time. And the day we left for Frigento, he celebrated a votive mass to St. Maximilian Kolbe on that very table where the saint founded his militia. Right on that table. And the documents are still there in over glass. I have glass over them, but the documents are on that table still. We could see the documents. And over in the closet nearby, there's just a glass door there now, but you can see his habit as well. So that was my beginning, when I first entered the religious life, a votive mass to St. Maximilian on the very table where he founded the militia. In any case, so this would be his work then for the rest of his life, bringing souls. That was his mission. And that will lead him now to the red crown of martyrdom, because now after his return from Japan, and the Gestapo came to arrest him. Now we're in 1941, during the Second World War. And his friars tried to prevent him, said, let's go in hiding. He said, no, I have yet another mission. Meaning, of course, the concentration camp. There were souls there too. And if Our Lady was calling him to go there, he was calling him to save more souls, which he did, as we know. And would suffer martyrdom of charity, as it was called, as he was called at his canonization in 1982. Canonized as martyr of charity. In any case, because he gave up his life for a man who had a family, who called out as they were standing in line there, as they were looking for a prisoner who escaped, and one man's name was called out, Franciszek Gajowniczek, who had a family. And St. Maximilian stepped forward voluntarily and asked to take his place. He was granted. That man continued, Franciszek Gajowniczek continued to share that story for over 50 years of the great gift that he was given. He never saw his sons again. I don't believe he saw his sons, but he did see his wife. But in any case, he continued for over 50 years to present that story, the great grace that he was given. This man, St. Maximilian Kolbe, gave up his life for himself, finally making his last public appearance on January 16th, 1995, right here at Our Lady's Chapel. That was his last public appearance. I was here for that. He was 93 years old. He was already suffering from the cold that would turn and develop into the pneumonia that would take his life, only 2 months later. But he came here, witnessing all over the world for over 50 years. Finally, the last one was right here in our chapel. He actually, in fact, I recall that one as well. Actually, I had the opportunity to meet him 3 times at that period. Because he'd appeared in Ohio first, and then he came over to New Jersey. There's a parish down there in Toms River called St. Maximilian Parish. And he went there, and we had a great celebration down there. We got, a group of us friars and sisters went down to film it, to record it. And it occurred on what would have been the 101st birthday of St. Maximilian Kolbe. So we were all there for that, and then 1 week later, he made an appearance at St. Francis Xavier out in Hyannis, and then the next day, January 16th, his last public appearance right here. And he was actually, that morning, he was with Father James McCurry, who's the conventual Franciscans in Maryland now. But this was in Granby, Massachusetts, and he was staying there, and when he awoke that morning, he was well out of it. As I said, he was already beginning to suffer from the cold that would turn into the pneumonia that would take his life. So he wasn't well, didn't really feel well. He seemed so out of it, the Father said, well, you don't have to go. Maybe we should stay here. And he was determined to come. That he had a very strong militaristic character himself that would remain with him for the rest of his life. And so he determined he would come and keep this appointment. And he came. And he went out much rejuvenated. You'd have thought he'd never been sick, all right, when he left. Well, it helped also that we also celebrated them out with the Mass. We sang the hymns in Polish. We had a superior at that time who had learned in his formation some Polish, little Polish, enough to sing hymns and maybe some prayers or something. So he taught us. And we sang the hymns in Polish, and it really was a great event. And he went out rejuvenated. All right? In any case, there's the intensity of that love of God and of the Immaculate, of Our Lady, that St. Maximilian had, that even the one who gave it and would even give up his life for another, who would share that for 50 years, ultimately right here. And that would bring him, that of course was what brought St. Maximilian to that crown of, the red crown of martyrdom. Not only that, but it was his wish, expressed wish, that he would be consumed completely for the Immaculate. And that wish also was granted. He was incinerated the next day and the ashes spread to the wind. So there's actually no first class relic left of him, except one. His beard was conserved. All right. In fact, it was after he returned from Japan. He was back in Neopokolonov, and he had shaved off his beard, and he gave it to a confrerer and said, "Now throw it in the hearth." So the confrerer obeyed, and he threw it in the hearth. But St. Maximin never told him he couldn't retrieve it. So, without the saints knowing it, of course, the friar retrieved it from the hearth, and it's still the beard still exists today in the hearth. Most of it is still in one place. I'm not sure where it is, but it was conserved by one friar. But pieces of it have been spread around, and we have some here as well. I think most of our friars have at least one piece, our friaries. But in any case, that's the one first-class relic that remains. Otherwise, everything, there's no first-class relic. He was consumed completely, just as he wished, giving his life to the very end. Not only, now imagine this one, here he's in the starvation bunker with several people, and when you're there, very much alive and conscious for 2 weeks or so. It takes about 2 weeks, nearly 2 weeks, before you actually die on that method. You'd be moaning, yelling, blaspheming. That's what the soldiers expected to hear. They didn't. They heard praying and singing. That's the way St. Maximilian led them to their deaths. He brought them along as well. So you see, that mission continued to the very end. And he, who was on 1/4 of a lung, could hardly walk, now beaten up and everything else, was the last one alive. They needed a bunker. He was given a lethal injection to take his life. And he died very calmly, gazing at the Immaculate One whom so thoroughly, intensely loved and served all his life, to bring all souls to God through her. And the prayer. Come, Holy Spirit, living in Mary, make me pure in body and spirit, and help me to die to myself.